It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host this morning. You know, I did a special yesterday on Common Core, and I got to tell you, the comments that came out of Arne Duncan, who is the director of, or the secretary of the Department of Education yesterday, are stunning to say the least. He came out and made a statement, which he's been forced to apologize for. On Monday, he made a statement that was very disturbing. He suggested that the people who don't like the new standards under Common Core are white suburban moms. In fact, his whole comment was, quote, "It's fascinating to me that some of the pushback is coming from sort of white suburban moms who all of a sudden their child isn't as brilliant as they thought they were, and their school isn't quite as good as they thought they were, and that's pretty scary." Well, with all due respect to Mr. Duncan, first and foremost, there are two federal prohibitions that require that the federal government not be involved in education. That is a function that is related to states. And secondarily, in my home state of Missouri, there is a prohibition against federal oversight and federal involvement in education as well, which is why the lie is constantly promulgated on you that this is a state-led effort. You'll notice, if you've been involved in Common Core at all, that they constantly will tell you that this is a state effort, that this is not a federal issue, that it's a state issue. And the reason they say that is because they're feeding you the propagandic lie that the federal government's not involved. And they do that for a reason, because the federal government legally is prohibited from being involved. That ought to tell you something, folks. Secondarily, well, all right, I'm going to get into that in a minute. That's going to be our first topic. I'm going to really go over this issue with you because, first of all, Arne Duncan is the last guy who ought to be talking about issues of segregation of the population. The guy is he is a flaming homosexual, which, listen, I don't care what you do, and I don't care who you sleep with, and I don't care who you love. But to sit there and try to incite racism, and it is inciting racism, if this guy had come out there and said, the people who are fighting Common Core are inner city blacks, the world would be screaming bloody murder. The guy would be literally pilloried in the public environment. And so we're going to compare and evaluate why he gets away with something like this. All right, our second topic is government is a farmer and a rancher. And you, ladies and gentlemen, are the crop and the livestock. The reason I say that is because there's an article out this morning in the National Review that talks about how we are passing regulations via extra-constitutional government agencies that have no legitimate right to exist under our Constitution. And they are passing new regulations at the rate of one for every 2.3 or 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 33 minutes. You got to understand the depth of the depravity of that, because our Constitution clearly states that only Congress may make new law. And yet we have federal regulations that are literally filling the Federal Register at the rate of 1,700 pages alone in 2013. It is a method by which Congress is completely circumvented. It's one of the ways in which the president utilizes executive orders to bypass Congress, and you need to be aware of exactly what's happening. Our third topic is what happens when a police state starts to eat its own. There's an article this morning out about the fact that the Walker campaign, which is out of Wisconsin, these are the guys who basically passed some laws that were anti-union, and they are now. Not only is this particular group being demonized, but they are undergoing a level of political intimidation that includes their homes being raided, subpoenas being issued targeting conservative groups and allies of the governor, Scott Walker. Not to mention the fact that they're using a gag rule to prohibit those people who are issued the subpoenas from even speaking about them. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to define a police state, when you turn on your own, when one party in a police state turns on the other party, you know it's not just the public anymore that is being ostracized and being targeted. Now you're actually targeting the other political party. That should be a signal to everyone that the end of politics in the United States as we know it is coming to a close. Our fourth topic is $1 trillion in new debt was issued just the other day. And this $1 trillion in new debt was issued to cover the bonds that were expiring. And this is during the course of, this is the first week, 6 weeks of the new fiscal year, because the fiscal year for the federal starts in October. And between October 1 and the first day of October of fiscal 2014, which I apologize, doesn't start in October, it starts November 14. Between that 45-day period, in less than a month after Congress passed the debt ceiling debacle bill, the Treasury has borrowed another $1 trillion in new debt. And ladies and gentlemen, this is just the beginning, because there is no debt ceiling now between now and February, I think it's 14th or 13th or whatever the heck the date was. My point is this. There is no cap on how much money that this administration can borrow between now and February. And furthermore, in February, they can ask for another $1 trillion, maybe $2 trillion. We don't even know. I mean, the sky's the limit with these guys. The profligate spending that is going on right now in this administration is so dire, so dangerous, so outrageous that the new head of or the new seat of power for all money transactions in the United States is Washington, D.C. There's an article out on St. Louis Today, which is definitely a leftist news organization, that says that D.C. is awash in contracts and lobbying wealth. Well, I want to put a picture on it on this issue for you guys. The average home within a commuting radius of Washington, D.C. is on the market, ladies and gentlemen, for less than 9 days. Less than 9 days. Most Americans have had their homes on the markets for 900 days and still can't sell them. The avalanche of money that's flowing from TARP, bailouts, unprecedented spending of the $7 trillion that we've incurred just over the past 4 or 5 years, actually, and the corruption of this administration and the open flagrance of this abuse of power is where this is coming from. And the torrent of money hasn't even begun to flow yet. Wait until you see how much money they're going to engender under new spending or under new borrowing between now and February. Wait until you start to hear the figures that come out in February where we're again talking about the debt ceiling, because this crisis of debt is going to happen again in February. All right, let's get back onto our first topic. I'm going to talk about this issue with Arne Duncan. He's been forced to apologize. He came out the other day and he made the following statement. It's fascinating to me that some of the pushback is coming from sort of white suburban moms who all of a sudden realize their child isn't as brilliant as they thought they were, and their school isn't quite as good as they thought they were. And that's pretty scary. Wow. Now, for the record, if Arne Duncan had made that statement and you changed the word from white suburban moms to black inner city moms, you would have the national press trying to toss the guy out. The only place I've heard mention of this is in a national news media last night, was on Megyn Kelly's show on Fox. She mentioned it. She had a short discussion with two guests. I got to tell you, Megyn Kelly is a mother, and I actually like her show. I think she breaks some stuff that nobody else in that organization is willing to talk about. And I've actually heard her do a segment before on Common Core, which is unusual because the mass media stays away from Common Core. They don't want to talk about it. Because if they ever talk about more than just the superficial surface of it, they're going to have to acknowledge that Common Core is a federally mandated, federally funded program which violates every aspect of the federal regulations. There are two specific regulations that prohibit Common Core and prohibit federal intervention in state education efforts, which is why everybody tells you, well, Common Core isn't a federal program. It's a state-led program. That's a lie. Megyn Kelly broke this, but I have to tell you, she was very, very soft on this Common Core thing. And the reason for that is because Fox News leaders, both Murdoch and Roger Ailes, are involved in Common Core. Peripherally, but they're involved in it. And they are supporters of it. And so she's got to be careful about what she can say. And that ought to tell you a lot, folks. When the media is being pressured not to really talk about what's going on in the nation, that is a dangerous place for us to be, because it is an exposure of the ministry of propaganda that I've been talking about and utilizing that term for a long time now. It should be, instead of calling them the mainstream media, it should be called the ministry of propaganda. You have to, acknowledge that this is so far out of control at this point. And I'm not hearing anybody talking about this on the non-mainstream, well, the non-mainstream media, the new media is talking about it, but the mainstream organizations are not. So let's take a look at what he actually was talking about here. He came out and he actually made a statement later on as an apology, if you want to call it that, in which he said he used some clumsy language. And I got to tell you, this isn't clumsy language, ladies and gentlemen. This was a straight-up racist comment by a white man. You see, what we're looking at here is the concept that government as a whole allows this racism to go on, institutionalized racism, reverse institutionalized racism. And it is racism towards blacks as well, and Hispanics in the minority. The reason for that, and the reason I say that is because, while superficially, language-wise, they offer these statements that, we're all about equality and so forth and so on. But the truth of the matter is that if you look at the historical basis for the Democratic support that has been shown by the minority communities, and you look at the historical positions that the Democratic Party has taken in terms of fighting against those minorities, you see a stark conflict. It was the Republicans who fought in the civil rights days in the 60s for equalization, not the Democrats. The problem is that the Democrats are actually buying the allegiance of minorities by offering them free everything. And I got to recognize the fact that this Common Core thing will affect them just like it affects everybody. This isn't just a white suburban moms issue. What this is an issue where the federal government is attempting to institute its propaganda into the school systems across 50 states. Now, 46 of them have signed on to it. There's only 46 or 45. I've heard different numbers on both. But essentially, the vast majority of America has been bribed into instituting Common Core because they have been fed with money that came out of the TARP funds and the bailout funds and the stimulus packages that were passed by Congress. Now, with all due respect, that's not the appropriate use of stimulus. The concept of stimulus was to stimulate the economy, not stimulate propaganda down into community schools where government, federal government especially, has or is traditionally not supposed to have an impact. The truth is they want to standardize national education. And that is, the only voices that are speaking out about that are the actual common we the sheeple. Because this is a bipartisan effort. Both parties are into this. Both parties are for it. Both parties want it. Both parties are stealing your ability to be a parent. Both parties are stealing your ability to have input into the standards and the education that your child receives. Dana Lash last night was on with Megyn Kelly, and I can't remember the other woman's name, but she tried to defend Arne Duncan, which is impossible. But worse than that is Dana Lash, who I have some level of respect for her. She's up in St. Louis, and she's a well-regarded radio host. She talked about the fact that, but didn't bring out any of the real damning facts. That's what bothers me. You see, the whole conversation was about Common Core, but not really about Common Core. In other words, there was very little said that would raise the hackles and raise the alert with Americans who aren't familiar with what Common Core actually is. So they kind of talked about it, but they didn't really talk about, it's kind of like saying, well, slavery is full of horrors, but not specifying what any of those horrors are. And to the person who is sitting there listening, there's not the level of impact that would cause the backlash that, quite frankly, ought to be engendered by every American. The truth is, and I'm not sure why Dana Lash didn't talk more about it, and I'm not sure why I'm pretty sure I know why Megyn Kelly can't talk about it. She can't talk about it. I mean, she had to report the news because it was obvious racism. But that was what the topic was about, the racism, not about Common Core. It's kind of like talking about, the peripheral of things without actually getting into the description. It's like saying, well, there's this big winged thing and it gets warm from time to time. But nobody specifies that it's a dragon with scales that's burning up, with flames shooting out of its mouth, our homes. This issue of trying to suggest that white suburban moms don't like these new standards, and then characterizing it as because the parents realize that their kids are stupider than they thought they were, and their schools are crappier than they thought they were, is not only an insult to white moms, it's an insult to every parent across the country. The truth of the matter is that this is a perfect example of how an individual who wants to raise an issue is traditionally beaten down in the public environment under the Delphi technique kind of thinking. The Delphi technique is one which is used by government as a mind control technique. It was invented by the Rand Corporation a long time ago. And when you go to public meetings, you'll recognize it immediately. Someone stands up at a podium and talks to you. They talk at you, not to you, right? And then they try to break the group up into, small segmented groups. They pass out they pass out all of these different questionnaires or what have you, and then they try to take a poll. Then they come back at the end of the poll and they say, see, the consensus from the group says this, or the consensus of the group says that. And if someone says, well, wait a second, I didn't vote that way, and I don't see my vote anywhere on your list of priorities or hot topics or whatever the phrase, whatever they're using, then that person is belittled and demonized and made to look like a rabble-rouser or marginalized in some way, shape, or form. And this is it on a national scale. When you look at Duncan making a statement like that, it is an outrage to everyone who is involved either in parenting or in education. The abuse that is being promulgated on the American education system, including teachers, by the way, because they tell you that states have a right to modify the curriculum. What they don't tell you is that states can only modify the curriculum by 15%. In other words, 85% of the curriculum has to be taught as outlined. The school, your school system, only has 15% maneuverability in terms of teaching things that aren't part of this federal curriculum. And I'm going to say it again for the record. There are federal prohibitions, 2 of them, that bar and prohibit the federal government from being involved in state education issues. And in most states, there are other prohibitions that again prescribe that the federal government may not be involved in education. That is, it is a state-led effort, which therein comes to or brings to the forefront the lie that you're being told by your school board, by your county, by your school counselors, your school officials. They're lying to you when they tell you that this is a state-led effort. That's a lie. They have to tell you that because if they admit something different, they are admitting that the federal government and the state governments are both breaking the law. Common Core supporters are arguing that American schools aren't rigorous enough and that the national standards will help every student kind of be brought up to speed. Well, the truth of the matter is, the people who have reviewed, the true educators who have reviewed the material in the curriculum, have openly come out and made statements that are completely and diametrically opposed to that. They will tell you that Common Core does not prepare your children for a college education. It prepares them for a trade school education, number one. Number two, it does not give them any of the materials that they need, either in math or language or science or history, to move on to higher education. In other words, everyone is being dragged down to the lowest common denominator. It's kind of like the concept of a union where nobody can be better than the worst guy. Everybody is judged, no matter how good you are, no matter how much support or no matter what the merit qualifications are for the individual, you're only graded based on the worst guy on the team. And the problem, of course, with that is that it defies everything about the concept of American exceptionalism and the ability for you as an individual to rise above your own means, your own station, if you will, your own place of birth, right? I mean, if we looked at stuff like that, would Ben Carson, Dr. Ben Carson, have risen to be a prominent neurosurgeon from the humble beginnings that he came from? I mean, the guy admits that he was born in a household with a bunch of other kids. I think he had 13 brothers and sisters. And his mother couldn't even read. In fact, he stated that she used to actually make them do book reports and then pretend to grade them because she couldn't admit to her kids that she wasn't able to read. And she would actually go out there and like circle stuff and say, oh, this is wrong. And she wasn't able to even read it. Now, when you look at a person who comes from such humble beginnings, how is it that he could rise above that station, if you will, in life that he was born into and become one of the top neurosurgeons for pediatrics in the world, not just the nation, ladies and gentlemen, in the world? He was a pediatric surgeon at Johns Hopkins. I mean, the guy is he's no slouch. He's clearly an intelligent, articulate, well-reasoned, well-rounded individual who has an excellent critical thinking process that he goes through to make decisions. His past would have belied that. And yet Common Core suggests that he should not rise above his station. He should stay right where he is, because no matter what his capabilities are, he's not entitled to be judged based on merit. He can only be judged based on the merits of the worst student in his class, if you will. And I don't mean class as in classroom. I mean in his class. The truth of the matter is, every parent should be angered by that statement. And it ought to be telling to you, if you're not involved in the Common Core debate yet, you're missing the boat. And if this doesn't trigger you to say, do the dog tilt head and say to yourself, wow, something's really wrong with that statement, and begin to do your own investigation, to begin to do your own homework, to begin to look at the issues and be a critical thinker and evaluate what really is Common Core. Why is it good or bad for my student and my child and my community and my state? Then you have completely, utterly missed the boat. I threw a challenge out there yesterday, and I said to parents, this is an indictment of you and your ability to parent properly if you are not fighting against Common Core. Well, I don't know how many of you have taken that advice and begun to do some investigative homework on Common Core so that you can make your own informed decision and opinion about Common Core. But if you're not doing that, then I guess I'm talking to deaf ears. I guess I'm speaking to a wall. I guess no one is really listening. And if so, that's a tragedy. Oh, I get it. I'm not a national player. I've got a very tiny audience. I don't know why. I suppose that there's some level of motivation to keep this show small because, I do inflame people and I don't really care. I'm controversial and I know it and I want to be. I want to anger you to action. I want you to say, wow, I wasn't aware of that. Or, wow, I never thought of it that way before. Or, wow, I guess I really do need to do some homework on that. My goal is to educate you and inform you and just plant the seed that hopefully you will take and allow it to, under your tutelage, be nurtured and matured so that you can go out there and form your own opinion and then fight on your own. That's the goal. I want to breed lone wolves, but lone wolves who will do things utilizing, and I know that now the DHS and the NSA, oh my God, he said lone wolves. He must be a domestic terrorist. That's not the kind of lone wolf I'm talking about. I want you to be an independent warrior for good, for the right things. I want you to get yourself educated so that you can play a role as a warrior in the fray. This is one of the issues. And it's one that ought to be near and dear to your heart because you, in this instance, can make a difference. You can make a difference in your local school board. I get it. This is not this is not something that requires national input. School boards across the country, counties, literally just counties across the country, are passing legislation that says Common Core may not be instituted in our school system, irrespective of state regulation. States are actively fighting against it. You can participate in this and be functionally valuable to the effort. You can't do that when we talk about the budget because it's a national issue. It's so far removed from your ability to make an impact that you can't do any good there. And I get that. I understand that. I mean, you can make your call to your congressman, you can write a letter, but you know what? Let's be honest. These people aren't listening to us. But the truth is, in this instance, you can make a difference because this is local. You can be a lone wolf for good. You can be the parent that shows up at the school board meeting and says, whoa, stop right there. Explain yourself. We've got to take a break. It's a hard pause. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick with us. You can find more information on our website at americasvoicenow.org, facebook.com/americasvoicenow, youtube.com/americasvoicenow. And we have a podcast service up there that you can listen to our shows on our website without the video. I know I'm really not made for TV, but you know, you can listen to it on audio and or download it and listen to it on a phone or an iPod or whatever you want. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick with us. When we come back, we're going to tackle this issue of government as a farmer and a rancher, and you as the crop and the livestock. You're being plucked, picked, and bred for their pleasure. We'll be back in just a moment.